Hi everybody, my name is Patrick Aggiano. I'm the Manager of Spirits Education and Development for Horizon Beverage, and you are tuning in to Shed Talk, trademark, where I sit around outside my shed and drink whiskey while talking into a phone to probably no one. The purpose of this series is to take all of the mumbo jumbo and legal regulatory jargon that are on our favorite bottles of spirits and break it down and see what is actually going on in that bottle. Hey you guys! So for today's episode of Shed Talks, we are talking about two terms that get jumbled together, confused quite often: small batch and single barrel. Small batch is a somewhat fuzzy term, meaning that you're making a run of bourbon and rye using a relatively small amount of barrels. The relativity, however, makes that somewhat of a loaded term. That means it can be anywhere from 2 barrels to 999. Depending on how many barrels you have in your warehouse, small or small batch, again, is a relative term. The average go-to in the industry is between 5 barrels and about 25-30 barrels. So you're taking those small amounts of barrels, you're blending them together. What are the other things that will introduce taste or flavor to your small batch bourbon or rye? 1, the amount of water used to proof down that ABV, meaning once you have that whiskey, you're going to add some water on top of it, and that's going to make your 140, 130 ABV or proof come down to a more palatable, great expression at 110, 120, 125. The other thing is how it's filtered, if it's filtered at all, which we'll get into more so when we talk about barrel or cask strength. My everyday sipper, Knob Creek, is a 9-year blend small batch rye. If you're gonna drink small batch rye, you might as well start with the family that introduced it back in the day. These are the guys who have the Bookers, Bakers, Basil Hayden, the small batch foursome, which is absolutely phenomenal. For relaxing times, make it Centauri time. This guy's clocking in at 100 proof and is looking at about a little south of 19 barrels for their small batch. Small batch whiskey is the whiskey you want to bring to your girlfriend's dad house the first time he cooks you dinner. To the point of proofing, a great example is the Widow Jane 10-year small batch bourbon. So you're looking at 5 barrels that make up this small batch, and you'll see all this information here on all small batches, the barrel, the batch number, etc. So these guys are taking those 5 barrels and they are proofing it down with water from upstate New York, the same water that has made the iconic buildings and bridges of New York City. Brings us to our next term, which gets confused with small batch quite a lot, which is single barrel. Easiest way to explain this is single barrel is the extreme small batch coming from numero uno barrels. Unlike small batch, this does mean something, and it is regulated to one singular barrel. Now you can have an assembly line of 1,000 single barrels and be constantly bottling those single barrel expressions. The thing with single barrels is the taste profile is going to change a little and the proof's going to change a little because you're doing barrel to barrel to barrel. So there is going to be some really beautiful inconsistency. This is celebrating the uniqueness of each barrel. Single barrels are great because you'll get a lot of information either on the neck or on the label that says the year that it was bottled, the rick house, the floor number, the left side, the right side, the barrel number, etc. Now, Sazerac is accredited for coming up with the single barrel program way back in the day, and it's because every distiller has something that they strive to find over their lifetime called the honey barrel. Some people say this doesn't exist, some distillers say they've never found it, but essentially what this is the perfect barrel hidden in the warehouse that has the most perfect whiskey in it. And this came to be about single barrel, that is, because the distillers would go in, have some late night entertaining meetings, and pick out what they thought was the best barrel, open that baby up, and everyone can drink from it, thus creating the single barrel program. If you're drinking single barrel bourbon, you must have flannel on. That's an American law. One of the most iconic American distilleries, one of my favorites, Jack Daniel's single barrel, absolutely phenomenal, super smooth, aged about 5 to 7 years on the top floors of the warehouse. Now this brings us to another good labeling point, that Jack Daniel's is labeled as a Tennessee whiskey, which means 1, it has to be made in Tennessee, and 2, more importantly, it has to go through what is called the Lincoln County process. The Lincoln County process is simply the fact that when that whiskey comes off of the still before it goes into the barrel, they're going to filter it, or charcoal mellow it as they call it, through a pretty huge amount of sugar maple that has been made into charcoal. And that's what gives it that iconic Jack Daniel's or Tennessee whiskey flavoring. So the guy who makes the sugar maple into charcoal literally sprays it down with 140 proof Jack Daniel's and then lights the whole thing on fire. I met him one night in Lynchburg at like midnight, and he came in wearing a cutoff sleeveless shirt, overalls, a Jack Daniel's hat, and his hand was wrapped up because he slightly caught it on fire. It was the coolest guy I've ever met. So to review, small batch is a small number undefined of barrels that best complement each other to make a blend to really showcase that whiskey, whereas single barrel, you are only dealing with one barrel and the taste, profile, characteristics, and proof will change. Can't go wrong when you're drinking all three.